I also like to thank our contributing sponsor, my HR specialist. A little bit about myself. I'm a certified insurance counselor. I'm co-founder and president of Insurnex. For the last 25 years, myself and my team have been working with business owners, entrepreneurs, and managers in their insurance planning and coverage placement, as well as overall risk management strategies. Prior to that, I worked in the legal field where I process and manage claims against insurance companies. With me here this morning is Oscar Rivas. Oscar is an employment law attorney and principal of the Rivas Law ALP. And also with us is Jose D. Alfaro, CIC's CPRM. He's also my brother and my business partner and co-founder of Insurnex. Thank you both for being here with us today to engage in our conversation, social media, in and out of the workplace. The intention of this conversation is to discuss the opportunities, risks associated with the use of social media by companies, employees, and individuals. Given the time constraints, we will only cover the more common issues. So as we look at social media and the opportunities, social media has opened opportunities and to communicate with the whole world very easily and affordably. According to Hootsuite, a social media platform, the first social media site was established back in 1997, and it was named 6 Degrees. Gaining traction in 2003, some of you may remember MySpace, and in 2005, with the advent of Facebook and a series of other social media platforms that followed, these platforms have created a whole new series of opportunities for companies and individuals to connect and interact all over the globe, 24 hours a day, at a scale not seen prior to the existence of the internet. For most of us, social media is a big part of our lives today, both personally and professionally. The opportunities are endless. Staying connected with family and friends, being entertained and informed. It helps us create communities where you can choose how and where you participate. You get to brand yourself out there in the world, in the workplace, and as a business owner, as a professional. You also get to share with the world. You can influence or be influenced by others, the world at your fingertips. You also could promote yourself, products, and sell products online, recruit potential team members, as well as show off your cooking skills or be discovered. I'm sure we've all sat down, if we all sat down, we could probably come up with hundreds of examples more of the opportunities and the value behind social media, and some of you may be using it in ways we haven't even thought of in the past. So with these opportunities, with these new technologies, and with the ease to be able to share ourselves, share our lives, share what we do personally or professionally with friends, with our networks, or with communities that we connect with, there's also some exposures that we as individuals and business often forget or are unaware of or accidentally step into. Jose, you're a certified personal risk manager and a certified insurance counselor. What are some of the risks that come to mind as you think of individuals, families, and kids using social media from day to day?
Morning, Carlos. Thank you. And glad to be here. And hello, Oscar. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for this interesting topic. The thing with social media, right? It's the new normal, and it's the things that we do today. So it's kind of like you're not really in the world if you're not connected somewhere or somehow through social media. And so some of the things that we're seeing, or that at least that to your question, Carlos, is what gets posted. How do we interact? How do we engage? What gets said, right, on social media? And in general, things that have come up are things that are related to like libel, slander, defamation of character. These things don't happen just on television alone. They actually take place outside of that with just people that we interact with, that we know in the workplace. It just runs the gamut. So when you get into TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, right, or Twitter or YouTube or whichever favorite platform you have, you're able to see that there's some things that you read about, you're like, geez, I don't know if I would say that. Or did this person or that person think about this, when they wrote that? So when it comes to defamation, right, like if you think of what that is, it's an area of law which provides a civil remedy when somebody's words cause harm to your reputation or to your livelihood. So if you say something about someone, right, and they feel harmed or injured, or it may have led to maybe a firing or what have you, there's chances that something will come up, and it's a very litigious society that we live in. So it's we just don't know. You turn on the TV, and there's lawyers you can talk to. There's people that will tell you maybe you should talk to an attorney because this person should have thought about what they said, or they should have been responsible. For parents, for example, do you know as a parent, right, what your teens are saying? Maybe a few years back, your teen's antics, right, expression or whatever, probably was okay. You probably laugh at it, but not today. And today that could be misconstrued as cyberbullying or electronic aggression, right? So if we don't know as parents what our children, our teens are doing, it could pose a risk. It could pose an exposure. And so in general, that's what you see, Carlos.
Thank you, Jose. And as we talk on the about the individual side, my mind is starting to go into business exposures or exposure for businesses. Oscar, what are some of the business exposures you're noticing for business owners and employees as well?
Well, I mean, the great opportunities that Jose was going over, they provide great opportunities for businesses. Businesses are able to tap directly into their consumers, maybe market themselves. So all those great opportunities that are available for any employee for any individual to connect with basically the entire world, that's available for a company, and it provides the same great opportunities in terms of marketing, in terms of staying in touch with their customers, providing updated information if they are selling a product. So these opportunities provide a great way for businesses to stay in touch with their customers, and that way the customers also stay in touch with them. It creates kind of that brand loyalty. From the social media aspect, you got to remember that a business is essentially a collection of people. Mm-hmm. And the same things that Jose was going over, those things are present with your employees. And the only difference is that if you're an employer, those employees have delegated authority from you to act. So whatever they do can actually come back to you. They could be your agent. If the person is high enough in the supervision level, that could be taken as an act of the employer. And through that, they can actually sue you. So it's possible that one of those individuals defames someone, or sexually harass someone, or does a whole host of other things, including the bullying and all these other problems, or maybe posting information that is untrue, creating a defamation issue. If it's done with essentially the cloak of authority from an employer, that employer could be sued for those actions. So the same things that Jose was going over are now amplified, and now the employer potentially has that exposure. So those risks are always there. And we'll go over in more detail the different areas, but those risks can pose a very serious risk of a lawsuit, both from the employee themselves or from people outside who are exposed to that communication.
Yeah, one of the things in what you're saying, both Jose and Oscar, is the lines have sort of blurred in a bit, and the smartphone has made it possible for those employment, personal, leisure, fun, play to sort of blur. When we look, when I look at my feed, right, at my news feed, whether Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn, I often find myself sharing aspects of my professional life and aspects of my personal life as well, or family life, or things that I'm doing to have fun or travel or food that I'm eating or whatnot, just things that interest me. And I have had this sort of freedom around it. But as I look at the conversation between employer and employee, one of the examples that comes to mind is a client that is in the janitorial field, and they do work for the movie studios. And one of the scenarios that they came across was they had been sent to a location, a private home residence that's used for filming purposes. And the employee that was assigned to that task is an artist, and he saw some art at that location and just really got inspired and excited and took some photos, talked to the facility owner about who the artist was, and the facility person in charge of managing that facility said, oh, there's also some other artwork, and showed him, and he said, can I take photos of it? And he went ahead and was so excited, took the photos of those arts, shared it, and posted it on Instagram. Within about an hour, his employer got a phone call that there was no photos allowed. There was a privacy non-disclosure issue because it's a movie set. It's private. It's filming shows that are coming in the future. And so as we looked at that, we were able to see the exposure for the business, right? This employee, innocently excited about art, he's an artist himself, sharing himself with the world, took these photos, posted them, and now his employer is having an issue, is in violation of the contract. And so that's an example that for me is like that place where work and play sort of begin to blur. And some of these steps, we're stepping into them innocently. And so I'm wondering, in those scenarios, both for Jose and Oscar, is here's this employee who innocently shot photos. Is there any exposure to them? And could he find coverage for himself personally through a personal umbrella or a homeowner's policy? And Oscar, from your side, on the employment side, where is the responsibility on the employer side? Did he or did not train this employee or disclose that he shouldn't be shooting photos? And if the employee was in violation of that, they have been trained, how does an employer not discipline, but bring, correct that matter or reduce that exposure? So with that, I'll curious to see what your thoughts are from your end.
Well, I could chime in on the personal side, on the individual family side. And when we think of harm or injury, right, with like online electronic aggression or harassment or cyberbullying, it's the bodily injuries are not like, well, the injuries are not like bodily injury, right? Like you think of somebody hurt and fell and they go and get treated. Usually these type of injuries or harm are typically not covered in the homeowner's policy. And so there's ways when you look at the policy and there's some coverage protections or endorsements, if you will, that you can add. So for example, personal injury for most policies on your homeowners would include libel slander, okay, as a coverage for defense. And so the key here is to be able to look at the policy and see how is my homeowner set up? Do I have this coverage? Will they be able to defend me, right? If I get sued or if somebody alleges that I did something that I was negligent or that caused injury or harm to somebody else. So I think, Carlos, to your question, is really knowing what is provided in the policy language as it relates to these new exposures, these new risks that we all could be exposed to.
From a business perspective, it's one of those things where I was discussing earlier in more general terms. That is that it used to be that the company would empower the CEO, CFO, COO, all the C-suite people, and maybe even some other supervisors to act on its behalf. And they generally had the ability to, publish things broadly. With the advent of social media, a janitor has access to the entire world, and they can create these types of issues. the solution is essentially training and making sure that the employees, and that means everyone all the way to the lowest employee, is aware of what the obligations are to the company and what they should and should not be doing. It creates an obligation on the employer to, and also a burden on the employer to make sure that those things don't happen. In that situation, it's essentially a third party, a civil discussion where the employer might be able to take action against the employee, depending on what was done. But in this situation, it would seem that the employer can take action, because even if the employee didn't know, he could have taken the pictures and not published them. And I think the employer could take action because it wasn't any sort of protected activity. And we're going to go over what that means. But in that situation, I think it is essentially the employer's obligation to make sure that its agents and its actors are aware of their obligations. So anybody who's going to this place, whoever that supervisor is, should be told what their contract requires, and that person then supervises those employees.
Thank you both. And as I'm hearing that and I'm looking at employee-employer relationship, there's another example that comes to mind, which is Belcampo. Some of you may be familiar with the brand Belcampo. It was a farm to table restaurant and butcher shop, one of my favorites for many years. And
I miss Belcampo, Carlos.
They had a great cheeseburger. And why I bring it up, because it was a company that, why I enjoyed it or believed in it was because it was a company that promoted grass-fed, free range, just really, letting the animals be how the animals are. And they were growing their own livestock and then bringing it to their own butcher shops and restaurants. So there was a commitment or an expression of high quality behind what they were creating. About a year or 2 years ago, as we were entering COVID, it seems that they entered some form of supply chain issues. And one of their butchers basically shared on Instagram that the food or the meats that they were selling were not actually grass-fed, were not actually free range. They were, just the regular stuff you would find from mass-produced sort of meats. And it became public. It went viral on Instagram. The LA Times picked it up. LA Eater picked it up. The organization has now, gone defunct. They're no longer in business. But it was a huge impact for me as a consumer and somebody who valued what they stood for. When that butcher exposed and said, hey, this is not, they're not giving you what you're selling. It just really, I just had no interest in doing business with them at that point, because it was sort of like, I felt sort of deceived and lied to, right? At that end. And that's my experience that I was left with. And it really prompted me to not purchase products from them anymore. And that's an exposure. And I think, Oscar, in past conversations, I have touched about the level of companies and employers being able to, deliver what they're promising. And if there's employees that are buying into that purpose, and they don't see that, they can easily talk about it and share it and be able to say, this is not the level of transparency or this is not the promise that we're saying we're doing. So in that, I think, Oscar, when you and I chatted, you sort of mentioned that it falls inside of the area of a whistleblower, right? Now, an employee sharing that. And so I want to, part of the value of this conversation is, how does employers and employees sort of dance and, co-creating work together out there is sort of where I'm looking at, and being within compliant and taking care of everyone in the process, both from the employee and the employer side. And any thoughts on that kind of a scenario?
Well, yes, and I mean that's almost, it's very similar to the other incident of the janitor. This is a person who's not tremendously high in the organization and creates an issue. Now, the issue that they create is bad for the company, but because they were essentially lying. We don't have to go to extremes. There's a lot of examples of when an employer, an employee does something that the employer their interests are involved. And sometimes it's because the employer was saying something truthful, and the employer now has to do something and react. Let's say that Belcampo wouldn't have gone out of business. Let's say that they were still in business. What could they have done to this employee? Clearly, the employee, what they said was true. If it wasn't true, they could have taken action. But if it was not true, they could have disciplined them. The company would still have had a tremendous issue on their hand, because this is an insider basically saying that something is not true. Then they would have to open up whatever it is that they needed to open up to prove that what they were selling is what everybody was buying. And so this gets into a lot of issues for employees. And the idea is always, what can the employer do in these types of situations when an employee doing something in social media has an impact on them? Now, if an employee is in their off hours doing something that doesn't impact the business, generally that's not going to be something the business is going to get involved in. Normally, that would be covered under essentially privacy. When the issue where I think the law starts to get involved is when the employee does impact the employer, and several laws come into play. And you start getting into the different things that an employer can do, and what the employer can do depends on essentially what was said, whether it was true, whether it was a lie, whether it was what they call a protected activity under some law, or were they using the company's computer when they did this, or were they doing it on their own computer on their own time? Were they doing it on the clock, or were they doing it off the clock? Privacy comes into play to all of that. And the reason for those laws coming into play is because basically most of the employees that anyone hires is what they call an at-will employee. That means that the employer can terminate that person for any reason, no reason. Actually, you can even have bad reasons. I can get up in the morning and say, you know what, I just feel like firing someone today, and I can fire that person. And as long as I don't do it for discrimination purposes or for some sort of some other issue that violates one of the laws, it's legal, even though it might be unfair. So generally, you have to start from the point that the employer can do a lot of things. And so when something like this happens, the first thing that you hear is somebody says, well, I have the right to free speech. I can say anything I want. Well, free speech is found in the First Amendment of the Constitution. It allows people essentially to talk whatever they want. But when you read the First Amendment, it says that the government shall not make any law restricting free speech, among other things. So private employers are not covered by free speech. Yeah. So somebody claiming that they're entitled to free speech and they can say anything, that really doesn't apply. The only exception would be if the employer is actually a public entity. So we're talking about LA County, LA City, any sort of subdivision of the government. If not, then the First Amendment doesn't apply. But other laws do apply. One of the big ones is the National Labor Relations Act, which is the law that basically allows people to unionize. They have a section 7, that allows people to essentially communicate for the mutual benefit of improving the workplace. So any communication that comes within that will be a protected communication. So an employer, for example, an employee who, for example, sends an email to other employees saying, hey, you know what, that manager is mistreating people and we should get together and, essentially talk to a lawyer. If the company finds out and takes action against it, that could be a protected activity, and the employer would not be able to punish someone for that. The labor code also has a lot of provisions that basically say somebody who engages in this activity is essentially protected from lawsuit. And that means that anyone who complains about meal breaks, rest breaks, overtime, paid wages, and even if the complaint is unfounded, it would still be protected activity because the law allows them to talk, and they're protected from any action from the employer. We already covered we already touched on privacy. Privacy also comes into play. You're talking about here, well, if somebody on their own time in their own computer or their own phone publish something, how does the employer know? Can the employer go into that employee's Facebook account or whatever Twitter account? There's privacy concerns into that. Now, privacy is generally weighed on the interests of both sides. So if somebody is using their systems to essentially disparage or defame a company, you can get into trouble there. And then the other ones are, political views are protected generally, religious activities are protected generally, and also agreements. The agreements could have protections for employees. So when it comes to these issues, the employer should be aware of, is this something that impacts my business? If it does, then you may be able to do something about it. But if it's a protected activity, make sure you consult a lawyer, because you may or may not be able to take action, and whatever action you take may trigger some lawsuit or something like that. So
I feel like we're just getting to the tip of the iceberg of this conversation. And, we're just now, at least how I interpret it, we're waking up to the value of social media within the business place. And now we're working through how do we integrate it within personal, business, and professional life. And as you're sharing, Oscar, I could already think, I'm already having multiple ideas of, follow-ups, conversations to this. But one of the things I want to touch on is, what are some of the best practices? Like, what are just, what are some of the key things, basic things that we should just keep in mind as best practices? One thing for me, it occurs is like the employee handbook. That's sort of like how to address that how to address these new conversations within the employee handbook, and in really beginning to develop a culture and connectivity within the employer or the work environment and the personal environment. What are some of the best practices that come to mind from your sides?
So I can speak to, again, right, on the family individual, because the thing with, when we look at employment in work, in business, it's usually generally treated as like a separate world, right? And then when it comes to individual, family, personal activities, it's treated. And if you look at the way insurance policies are structured, most of them clearly state, right, like this is for personal auto, private passenger auto, homeowners, right? And then you look at employers, right, for general liability, business. So they're two separate things. So I think that being able to, have awareness, right, of how these things and what you do and how you interact with these platforms can impact you or your life personally. I mean, whether it's at work, I mean, you get fired because somebody said something they shouldn't have said, or they posted a picture that they took at some party, right? And it caused you to be dismissed. I mean, what are your, what are your options, right? In these situations, and it trickles down over to you personally. So I think it's the key thing here is to have awareness, have awareness about what you're posting. I mean, I usually tell my clients, look, before you post something, okay, think of it if this was to be read in a court of law, right? Like, how will it sound? Like, how they interpret it? Like, you're gonna be like, yay, or you're gonna be like, oh my God, like, I would never say that, But the thing with the internet and these platforms is that once you put it in there, it stays there. And even if you go and remove it, I mean, who knows how many thousands of people have already seen it, taken pictures, and may have shared it. So it's just all over the place, and it's hard for us to know, where it ends up, right? So until you get something in the mail that says, hey, there's a claim against you, or you get served, right, with the lawsuit. It says this person is claiming ABC. So things to look to awareness, right? Number one, looking or talking to your kids in the family, in the home, like, hey, having conversations about like, what are they posting? What are they interacting with? And just bringing awareness to them, right, of the impacts, right? Looking at or reviewing your policies with the agent, right? Like take a look at, hey, do I have coverage for this, right? If something were to happen and they misconstrue it as will my policy do anything? And so your agent should be able to go through the policy, review it, and see if there's language in the policy that you can rely on, at least, if anything, for defense costs. A lot of times, there's claims or lawsuits that come up where you may be exonerated, meaning you're okay, but that could be 2-3 years later. In the meantime, you got to defend it. And that's where that's where the high cost comes. It's like, I got to get a lawyer to defend this claim, $300, $400 an hour. It adds up quickly. Other things to look at is, do you have a personal umbrella, right? So umbrellas are broader types of coverage protections. They're extra layers that pick up on your homeowners and on your auto, so that if there's not sufficient coverage there, you may be able to get it through an umbrella. Personal injury, for example, different than personal liability, right? Which is personal liability is what happens in your premises. Personal injury is.
And you're touching on, Jose, on areas that I think these issues are having us look at insurance policies newly, right? And looking at, and insurance companies are looking at it as well. They know that the environment has shifted. We're all in a digital space. So insurance carriers are also coming in with endorsements to help us gain some form of coverage around it.
Really quick, Carlos, some of them are actually excluding it, limiting it.
I've seen that.
So not all policies are created equal, right? This is why we encourage everyone to, hey, get a cup of coffee on a Saturday or Sunday and, go through these things the way you go through, when you're getting ready to file tax returns, at least once a year. Anyways, yeah.
And on the employer side, the organization side, having a good employment practices liability policy is now more essential than it's ever been. And with that, we want to go ahead and, Oscar, we're getting close to our completion time, and we want to open it up for questions. And also, Oscar, any best practices, final thoughts as we go into the questions?
Yeah, in terms of the best practices, for me, it's kind of the same, essentially 4 or 5 recommendations. The first one is make sure you have a legally compliant employee handbook that addresses these issues. You should have a policy specific to this, specific to privacy, and specific to anyone, including your employees, using your information systems. The next one is train your HR and your supervisors and have them, disseminate that information to their employees. The hardest thing is for sometimes someone to actually spot these issues and raise them and elevate them to someone who can actually see the issues to take the correct action. And if you're faced with one of these issues and you have any doubt, consult an attorney, consult an HR specialist, consult someone who can guide you on the decision-making process to make sure that you don't cross a line. And lastly, and this is very important, you should do this last. A lot of companies do this first, is document everything. But document everything after you've done everything correctly. Because if you document anything and you did the wrong thing, you just created evidence for the other side.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that you go through that process, make sure that you took the correct actions, and then you document so that you're prepared for anything that happens. And lastly, I think, Carlos, you touched on, consider insurance. In a lot of cases, once you get sued, you've already lost something. So the winning strategy is almost like the nuclear war mutually assured destruction is don't go to war. So don't get into litigations. If you can avoid it at all costs, just take whatever actions you need to do, because once you get into litigation, it's going to be costly and it's going to be disruptive, and you want to avoid that as much as possible. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Oscar. I do have a question here. Do I have a say as an employer? Do I have a say in what my team members post and whom they interact with in social media?
Not preemptively. In other words, you can't like tell someone who they can interact with. You can control the interaction if somehow it impacts your business. So, for example, if somebody's posting stuff that is making it online and people are finding out and they recognize that person and associate it with the business, now you have an interest, because whatever that person did, if it was bad, they posted something that was racist or whatever, now it's being associated with your business, and now it's impacting your business. Well, now you should be able to take action. Now, again, depending on what they did and what they posted, you have to be very careful. But if it doesn't impact your business, privacy probably trumps, and you're done. But if it is impacting your business, you do have an interest, and the law allows you to take action. How much action depends on what they posted and whether it was true, false, or it was something that could be considered protected activity.
Thank you. And it's, social media and smartphones make it so easy to take a selfie, shoot a video, take a picture of something or someone, and just share it. And we often don't know how far the outreach is going to go, and what's going to go viral or what's not going to go viral on that. And I think you both have shared some, good mindfulness practices to keep in mind. Jose, my takeaway from what you're saying is, if you post something, will you be able to stand behind this 5-10 years from now? And if it was in court, will you be comfortable with it, having it shared and made out there public? And Oscar, what I'm getting from you is really being proactive. Is really, as an employer, getting ahead of it, like having these conversations with team members, really walking the talk and developing practices that are going to help prevent, this type of situations. One of the things that I've often heard is like the best insurance is just to work on preventing something from happening. I see another question is, do I need to have insurance for these risks? And the answer is yes. and it is different when it deals with digital platforms. Most policies on the general liability, professional liability, or whatnot tend to have some exclusions around once it makes it to the digital space. So there are policies out there, cyber liability, media liability, that can pick up some of these exposures as well. So with that, I'm going to bring it into our closing remarks. I'd like to thank Oscar for being with us, Jose for being with us this morning and contributing to this conversation. I'd also like to thank everyone who attended. Thank you for being with us today. This is the kickoff to our online workshops or conversations series. And I also would like to thank my HR specialists for contributing, for being a contributing sponsor to today's event. So thank you, everyone. This is being recorded, and we'll share the digital version with you once that becomes available. Have a great day, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you.